At that time, it was like somebody grabbed me by the arms and carried me up the hill. The incline was about like that, and my hands not once ever touched the ground. I get to the top of the hill, and my neighbor who drove the pickup just happened to be home. He drove a semi for a living, and he was home that day. And he was driving by, and it's like they just let me go. Whoever carried me up the hill is, they have to say, this is far enough. And he stopped, got out of the car. I could still see the fear in his eyes, wanting to get my parents, but couldn't leave me there alone. About that time, an elderly couple pulled up and told him to go get my mom, that they'd stay with me. And the man, I never knew his name, never introduced himself, but he laid under my feet to keep me from having a struggle to stay on the hill. While I laid there, his wife put a hat under my head to keep my head off the ground. A couple minutes later, an off-duty nurse that was coming home from work pulled up and sat there by my side until the ambulance got there. I laid in ICU for about 6 hours alone. When the doctor walked in and told me my back was broken 8 places, that everything I dreamed of was gone. I would never wrestle, I'd never join the military, that the life I wanted was dead. And then he walked out, shut the door, and I was alone for the rest of the night. 16 years old, 5 days before my birthday, laying there looking up at the ceiling, realizing that everything I lived for was still at the bottom of the hill in the car. I decided that if God wanted me to preach that bad, then, I'd do it. 5 days later, 3 weeks before I was supposed to be let out of the hospital, I was released on my birthday, April 10th, 1999. The next morning, I preached my first sermon on April 11th, 99, and was licensed into the ministry. I was licensed a Southern Missionary Baptist preacher. I was up there preached for 45 minutes, my first sermon, wearing a back brace. Hard plastic full turtle back brace. Didn't wear a tie. My back brace kept me from it. Spent 2 years trying to be the good little Baptist preacher everybody wanted me to be, doing the 3-point sermons and, preaching with the traditional King James Bible and doing everything the church told me I needed to do. But I grew angry. I was angry at God. I had resentment because I was living a life that I never wanted. And I wasn't seeing the blessings coming from the preaching and from the calling that I was supposed to. I didn't have a peace inside of me about it. I went to Mid-Continent College in Mayfield, Christian college. There I met a girl, Ashley. Became like a sister to me, actually became more like a mentor to me. Taught me how to be myself. Showed me that I could be me and God still will use me. I remember meeting her. She had platform boots on, came up to her knees, her jeans were ripped, her hair was dyed, looked completely different than anybody else on the campus, stuck out like a sore thumb. And started hanging out with her. Next thing I know, I was dressing the way I felt comfortable dressing more often, I was going to church wearing my chains and spikes, and I was willing to dye my hair again, and I spent the next few years after that trying to prove that you can preach and do ministry and you can go to church and be yourself without having to put on this image and fit this profile. That God will use you and love you regardless of how you look. It's not what's on the outside, it's what's the inside. I stood up and I've told churches this, and I've argued with them, and I've tried to prove my point. I spent 12 years fighting for a ministry that I never wanted. Living a life that I never wanted to live. I look back 12 years ago to that day, the day that changed everything for me, and I can still see the car. I can still feel the pain. But that anger I have for God that I used to have inside me, somewhere between then and today, between that little boy that was stuck in that car and the man that you're looking at, somewhere between those 12 years, that anger turned to love. I realized that the 12 years I've been fighting has been very miserable. I won't lie to no one about that. Trying to find churches that agreed with what I said hasn't been very easy. Finding pastors and fellow ministers that was willing to listen to me say, look, we're doing this wrong. Our messages, our church services aren't helping people come to know the Lord. Instead, we're leading people to hell, has been next to impossible, to say the least. But the one thing I've learned over 12 years is that everything has happened for a reason. I look back to 12 years ago and I thank God for that car wreck. People ask me, they say, Tony, what was the best day of your life? I tell them it was April 5th, 1999. It was the biggest miracle God ever gave me. He saved me from myself. Then they ask me, what was the worst day of your life? Again, it was April 5th, 1999. Because that's when I realized that it doesn't have to be the way it's been for me. I didn't have to live 12 years being able to tell when it's about to rain because my back would lock up. I could have had a normal job while doing ministry. I could have had full use of my back. To this day, I can't bend and twist certain ways. I learned the hard way that regardless of how hard we fight, sooner or later, God is going to get his way. You know, I was naive enough to think that maybe God didn't exist in Canada. Maybe he stopped at the border, like our police do. I tried my best to run from him, and I didn't even get 3 miles out of my house before he stopped me. I preach today because I don't want to see a kid make the mistake I made. Somewhere out there in this world, there's somebody that God is calling. Maybe it's not to preach. Maybe it's to do mission work. Maybe it's to teach. Maybe it's just to say hello to somebody at school. But they're fighting him. They're running. And I don't want to see other people make the mistakes I have made. Because we can run all we want. Sooner or later, God's going to catch us. We can't outrun him. He can make it to any country we can. He can see us no matter where we're at. We can hide behind our church walls. We can hide inside our houses. He can still see us.